Thank you everyone for joining. We're going to get started. Maria, can you just confirm that you have screen sharing abilities?
Hey, Sarah, I'm here. I've got screen sharing. It looks good on my end.
Can you hear me, Dad? Hello?
I hear you. Who's speaking?
Oh, I'm so sorry. This headset is also connected to my phone. I'll have to mute myself here.
No worries.
Just confirming, Maria, that you have screen sharing abilities.
Okay, I gave it a shot. Is it showing up?
Yes, perfect. And I'll make Brittany a co-host.
Thank you. All right, I couldn't do this without everybody holding me up, so thank you. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Maria Gabrielle Sippin. My pronouns are they or she, and I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and sometimes Los Angeles, California, land of Multnomah and Tongva. Thanks for joining me in this session, and thanks again for the Thrivance group organizers for doing everything to lead this charge and hosting another Unurbanist Assembly for all of us. My colleague, Brittany Jones, our Communications and Equity Manager at Safe Routes Partnership, is engaging with you all on Twitter at Safe Routes Now. So say hi to Brittany, use the right hashtag, and let's capture some of your thoughts today. All right, let's do a roll call in the chat. Please share your name, pronouns, affiliations, where you're tuning in from now, or the place that you represent. Thank you, Brittany, for putting that in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll continue with who I am. I'm the Technical Assistance Manager for Safe Routes Partnership. I joined the organization this year after spending the last few years working at the Oregon Department of Transportation. Planning work for me is always evolving, especially these last few years. I'm drawn to planning work with a deliberate focus on health equity. And after spending 2021 with NACDO and Dr. Destiny Thomas's inaugural Transportation Justice Fellowship, I've been mentored a whole lot to continue steering my work toward reparative policies. These are policies to make right with compensation or restitution for the systematic harms that government has brought onto people. Dr. Thomas challenged us fellows to think about what reparations looks like in our planning work and to help facilitate that change, especially for those of us heavily involved in transportation. There's a lot of room to influence decarceration and to positively impact the lives of young people through Safe Routes to School policy work. And now the movement includes parks too, and we're excited about that. The bipartisan infrastructure law was enacted last November, which allocates state departments of transportation more funding than before to make walking and biking better for everyone, especially children. The Federal Highway Administration wants all of us to work on transformation that repairs roads and repairs communities. So we'll have to see what that's all about. Safe Routes Partnership provides technical assistance and is working to translate what the bipartisan infrastructure law means and how to build power within communities to advance projects in communities who have needed it the most now and in generations past, and with an impact on generations to come. The benefits of parks and nature cannot be fully realized by everyone until we address all the barriers for accessing these public spaces and the harm that happens in these spaces too, from discriminatory policies and excessive rules, police contact, surveillance, personal safety issues with other people, and gender and racial violence. And this content can feel a little heavy at times when referring to actual events involving violence and racism. I tried to limit any details that may be especially graphic or offensive related to those events. And you're welcome to tune in with mics off and cameras off. I've got different ways for you to engage today for your participation style of choices. If you can open another window and want the option to respond anonymously, please go to slido.com and enter the code 4318551, or scan the QR code with your smartphone camera if you want to hold it up to the screen. And you can add your questions in Slido or chat on Zoom, and we'll pause to address them when we can, or we'll take them at the very end. All good? I'll read off some of the folks in the chat. We've got Columbus, Oakland in the house, DC, hey Corey. Thank you. UT Austin, hey. All the grad students in the house, I'm one of them. I went back to school. I know some of you all in the room did too. Good for you all. I know what that's like. I wasn't sure where to put this slide, but oh yeah, Alabama's in the house too. I wasn't sure where to put this slide, but I felt like it could be shared sooner. Kristen, the author of Rage of Innocence, gave me something to think about. I remember the first time I had discussions at work about the age of youth. I was working at Children's Hospital Los Angeles in the adolescent medicine department. We eventually rebranded to adolescent and young adult medicine. So our acronym was Division of Adolescent Young Adult Medicine, DAYAM, DAM. And we had nursing staff, doctors, social workers, communications professionals, and epidemiologists debating the age of youth and when adolescence ends. The age of brain's full development came up often. Then there's the health insurance limit for being under a parent's plan at age 26. So youth, adolescents, young people, there are social constructs or biopolitical constructs, according to this author, around age and who can act childlike or who's allowed to be a child and when and where. Those constructs and policies bound by age, like when someone is old enough to purchase cigarettes or be tried in court as an adult and face adult-sized consequences, they all affect youth health and their interactions with carceral systems. I'd like to approach most of this conversation on decarcerating youthhood locally at a neighborhood level. We can discuss policies and programs at a neighborhood level and move outward. For a grad school course on public health systems this year, I was assigned to do a book review and develop a zine on the political determinants of health by Daniel E. Dawes. Not getting paid to promote the book. I just happen to like it and find every opportunity to like name drop the book and quotes in it. And since then, I've been way more eager to dig into those political determinants, not just the social determinants we've heard a lot more about in the last decade in public health. Politics drives a lot of what's planned in our built environment. And one of the author's clearest messages about political determinants is the massive impact and legacy of housing segregation on health inequities we see today. There's plenty of peer-reviewed research on this and not enough being done at a large scale nor fast enough to address the worsening conditions that show up as illness, death, and violence toward racialized people. Residential segregation, redlining, the development of suburbs, and the disinvestment and abandonment by government agencies in Black communities all have shaped location and patterns of housing development and where resources go. This means government-driven racial segregation not only decided where Black and brown people and immigrants could and couldn't live, but also what public resources they could use, like schools and parks. It's no accident that schools and parks of higher quality are scarce or non-existent in Black neighborhoods, and numerous and full of amenities, and parks numerous and full of amenities are in white neighborhoods. While it sometimes feels easier to bring out this list of all the harmful policies in decades past or recent times, we can reflect on policies and actions that can expand healthful possibilities so that Black, Indigenous, and other people of color can benefit. Increasing wages and providing school lunches are some of those politically driven policies, and they don't stop there. Maybe you've got some policies that come to mind. Feel free to share those in the chat. In the book, The Political Determinants of Health, I learned that the federal school lunch program came about because the military was trying to recruit young men in the last century, and they were finding that the young men were malnourished. And so the federal school lunch program came about. And that to me just really shows you the government has a political will and they want something for either like some capitalist or militarist like reason. They will achieve that program and they will dedicate resources to it. So if you've got anything in the chat, feel free to share. Love to hear back from you at some point. So we're here at the Unurbanist for our collective healing and learning and to bring forward valuable information in the form of literature, stories, images, and songs. I want to honor my ancestors and parents today. They lived through martial law, military occupation, exposures to environmental harm and racism as farm workers in Watsonville, California, and the Philippines. Protecting the home and family documentation status was a multi-family effort where we had 3 families of mixed documentation status living under one roof. That was my childhood. I always yearned for more freedom outside and a greater range to explore, but I understand now why my parents were so protective. So let's get into Slido. See if I can make this happen. Okay. What's your experience with parks? Share a recent memory or one from childhood. And these could be shared anonymously. I'll give you some time to think about that. Think about your identities, what you bring to the space, what you bring to Unurbanists, and why you decided to show up in a room to talk about parks and decarceration. Give you some time there. In the meantime, I'm going to catch up with some of your chats and your introductions. Now, I thought about the postcard concept because everywhere I go, I love to send myself one, give me a reason to keep buying stamps and to support the US Postal Service and to remember where I go. I'm not on Instagram. I'm not a heavy social media user right now. So my little catalog of postcards helps me remember some of those experiences. Okay, someone remembers walking to the park with their mom and two sisters. There you go, walking to the park. That's one big thing that we're going to talk about today, and just your proximity to parks and what that means. Thank you for sharing. You go to the park as a place to retreat, an extension of home. I'm wondering what parks look like where you were at. I know parks in my neighborhood had a lot of asphalt. First park I got to experience in the United States was the blacktop of my elementary school in Koreatown. We didn't have a whole lot of grass. So park space was really special. Well, there's all the responses rolling in. You should be able to see them. They're all coming through. Thanks for putting some thought into that. Reading in the sun with wildflowers. Use parks as a spatial reference. Yeah, there's some landmarks in parks that I still remember today, even as a kid. Birthdays at parks. Oh yeah, that's a good one. And you know, I recognize not all of them are going to be these glowing reviews of parks, and maybe some of them are going to be even more difficult memories. So thank you for digging into that memory bank and spending some time to think today on this. All right. Hope I don't cut any of you off. I'm hoping it still continues, but I'll move on here. Okay. So why care about youth access to parks and decarceration? You know, everyone's enjoyment experiences with parks will vary. And again, the benefits of parks and nature can't be experienced by everyone until we address all the barriers of getting to parks and then the many things that affect youth when they're in parks. So we can go through some of the things you may have already known about access to parks and nature. And you know, this might all seem really familiar to you all. Exposure to nature is linked to overall better physical and mental well-being. The pandemic has driven many people to seek out opportunities for open space and fresh air. And I think all of that has been amplified in the pandemic. You know, we see all the disparities happening right now, and who has access to fresh air and open space and who doesn't. Nearby parks are crucial for health and well-being. UCLA's Institute of Environment and Sustainability puts an emphasis on parks within walking distance as especially important for health, but all outdoor experiences contribute positively to youth health in general. We're discussing decarceration today in relation to parks because exposure to police is a barrier for health, especially for racialized and unhoused people. Carceral conditions go beyond police exposure. So if exposure alone can be detrimental to someone's health, experiencing any type of force or intimidation even once or in an ongoing fashion could be permanently devastating. There's a growing body of research that studies police exposure and its impacts on youth, women, and pregnant people. On the topic of youth spending time in their neighborhood parks, this means Black and Brown, Indigenous, LGBTQ plus youth, immigrant youth, and youth with disabilities. We can't ignore all the instances and examples of how parks can be unwelcoming and dangerous places, whether young people are biking, skating, or hanging out alone, just being themselves or with others. It's not just about the design of the park, but who's patrolled or surveilled there compared to other park users, and how the park is used, and how an individual or group's use of the park is perceived, accepted, or not. On surveillance and patrolling, this applies to national parks too, even though we're talking a lot more about the local park. As published in The Atlantic, the militarized presence of park personnel and patrols are especially unwelcoming and intimidating. Park usage and comfort among Black, Asian, and Latino visitors compared to white people are greatly different. For Native Americans, park access is not just about recreation and leisure. It's recovering land that was their home for millennia and recovering a loss that they were forcibly removed from. In an article titled Return the National Parks to the Tribes, Native American author David Truer said, "For Native Americans, there can be no better remedy for the theft of land than land." He described the deadly battle against the Mariposa Battalion, who came to take Yosemite, California from the Miwok tribe amid the gold rush. In colonizer speak, it's not surprising to read these written accounts describing natives as needing to be controlled and made obedient by the white militia and heavy artillery. That not much has changed if we're seeing the objectives of that with some groups, even within our communities. I've got a few slides that I'm going to go through here with examples of carceral culture and incarceration across the United States. And I'm bringing up the content warning again, as I briefly describe these real events involving violence and racism without all the details. And this is Lentz Park in Portland. I think this was last year. Got to see this park, and just one day I saw all of these names painted on the sidewalk. Okay, in Alabama last year, here's a current example. A basketball ban was implemented, then eventually reversed by the mayor. The Parks and Rec department prohibited pickup games and closed the courts during softball games due to complaints from softball game patrons, apparently about foul language used at the basketball courts. If you've ever seen poster boards at parks or any public space with lengthy codes of conduct, it feels like they have racial implications and are usually anti-poverty, anti-homeless too. In Chicago, we have this curfew going on for minors under 18. The mayor is trying to crack down on crime and violence and decided to target youth because of a shooting at Millennium Park. I'm going to bring up this video if I can. Let's just hope we don't get ads. And I got an ad, a long car ad, because we must be talking about transportation today, and all the FBI agents and the bots know.
They've made numerous changes to try to address the issue.
5 minutes, you may be in prison the rest of your life.
And here's what the mayor and law enforcement agencies have done recently to try to curb violence downtown. Last night, a new curfew began at Millennium Park. The area was filled with private security and Chicago police officers to make sure no one under the age of 18 entered the park after 6 p.m. unless they were accompanied by a responsible adult. The mayor also signed an executive order to move the citywide youth curfew from 11 p.m. to 10 p.m. Last week, Chicago police even increased their patrols in the downtown area and added more officers along the CTA system. And lastly, last month, the Cook County Sheriff's Office set up a command post in the River North neighborhood to help assist Chicago police with crime downtown. What else can be done? Well, Chicago Police Superintendent David Brown and Mayor Lori Lightfoot are expected to have a news conference later today on public safety. As you heard, Lauren, already scheduled. We'll see what else they say about what's going on recently.
Okay, so it sounds like the way they're going about addressing public safety is finding some restrictions for youth. I'm sure you all could come up with some much more upstream solutions. Okay, and taking you back to 1989, maybe for some of you, that's a long time. The Central Park 5 case involves Black, African-American, and Latino teens who were tried as adults and were wrongfully convicted of rape of a woman jogger, a white woman jogger. Police played a role in coercing the youth into false confessions, and they were eventually exonerated, but only after they all nearly served their full sentences. And this might be pretty recent for some of you if you've seen the Netflix documentary. I haven't seen it yet, but I heard it's a good one. And then Pride. People celebrate Pride in all kinds of ways in every city. And in true Portland fashion, there are themed bike rides all month long, thanks to Pedalpalooza. And I missed out on that one, but it was a well-marketed bike ride that kicked off Pride Month. And it was less welcoming for participants because they said they disliked the police presence. And the ride sponsorship was the Portland Business Alliance. And if you look into that, which you should, I think you should check into all kinds of event sponsors. But the Portland Business Alliance is an organization that invest their membership dollars in anti-homeless programs to beautify downtown and to reduce crime. They ramped up their efforts against houseless people and against protesters since the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020. And the ties with downtown business groups and police have grown stronger since then in Portland, and I'm sure many other cities too. Tear gas is increasingly being used at protests by local police departments, FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, all kinds of folks who claim to be like law enforcement. Investigative journalists had a hard time pinpointing in Portland which agency was responsible for excessive crowd control tactics that were being used by these officers dressed head to toe in full military grade equipment. And since the nightly Black Lives Matter protests of 2020, tear gas use was affecting more than the people who were directly hit. Law enforcement used tear gas so much that the gas would just linger in neighborhoods. Organizers for the Families Belong Together rally, pictured here in Los Angeles, to protest the Muslim ban and the undocumented family separation at the border, had conflicts about the event code of conduct, which was circulating in social media. There was some language around obeying law enforcement and must agree to nonviolence. And then the Portland Climate March, pictured below that, started their event again at a park too, popular protest starting spot. It was Dawson Park, with community members providing security and first aid without police involvement. Two things I would offer here that I have the most experience or familiarity with when it comes to maybe trying to offer some other alternatives or solutions, things that I've been working on a whole lot, not just in my work, but in my own community participation and advocacy. One, participatory budgeting. Secure local funding from elected officials and their budgets, or like ARPA funding, to launch a participatory budgeting process where the community has control over real money, and communities of color and youth of color can steer the process and develop projects that would be funded with that money. There's examples around the globe with successful participatory budgeting processes, lots of momentum happening in Seattle, they've gotten far along. New York City, a lot of them start with schools and school districts, but I think you can scale up participatory budgeting, especially when it comes to trying to come up with climate solutions. Lots of countries around the world are trying to use this to identify the needs of those who are most impacted by climate change and really centering frontline communities. And on that note too, the Portland Clean Energy Fund, some of you may have heard about this like landmark legislation that was passed at the local level. Voters voted it in. It's a corporate tax that has no sunset, creates, tons of resources for clean energy projects with an emphasis on equity. And that kind of corporate tax has been doing good since it was passed, because corporations have been doing great financially during the pandemic, especially, ones like Apple, Nike, a lot of big names that operate in Portland. Next is planning that's embedded in schools. As a planner, we should be getting young people involved throughout the planning and project delivery process. When it comes to projects related to public spaces and streets and parks. We're trying to design a future for youth. We can't do it without them. Next, departments of transportation transferring land, relinquishing spaces. I think land back is really important. I think DOTs can do that too, especially if they hold tons of land that they're, reserving for construction staging or future highways expansion. There's a lot of land. I think they're, always taking inventory of, and communities are being a lot more aware of that. DOTs can transfer parcels of land to Native governments, neighborhood organizations, or depending on the context, like there's small pieces of land and large pieces of land. Give these community members control of that land, let them transfer its uses into parks or something else. And then lastly, I think it's a no-brainer, take police out of the picture when you can. The Safe Routes Partnership eliminated E for enforcement from the Safe Routes frameworks in 2020. And I think that's something that's really easy to do. If you've got a bike ride, a safety workshop, community picnic, take police out of the headlining roles. Like, don't give them that PR opportunity. Don't give them that meet and greet position where they're always in front of youth and they interact with families. I remember police coming into my classroom throughout my elementary and high school education, from career day to health workshops. That was so unnecessary. It didn't really make sense to me as a kid then. And now that I think about it, we were always exposed to police. I think even my guidance counselor in high school saw that I didn't really have good grades, and the first line of career or line of work they referred me to was go into law enforcement or join the military. And that's why I entered grad school at the age of 30 something to be a planner, because I didn't know any of those careers existed. Okay, and this is where I toss it all to you. If you want to type in the chat how you are conceptualizing alternatives without police, thinking about decarceration for youth in public spaces. I'd love to hear from some of you. If anyone wants to step up and unmute, feel free to join then. But otherwise, I'll just keep reading through what you have to say here and narrate some of the discussion. Save plenty of room for that. And I'll queue up the Jamboard for you all if you want to lurk in that space too. Or Brittany might have already got you on that. Okay, I've got a Jamboard here. I'm going to share that. So I offered this really basic power map here so that we can think through this together, or you can bring this format into your own spaces where you're having discussions about what can you do about any issue. I like to start with a power map just to wrap my mind around who has like financial interests in keeping surveillance alive in these communities, who has financial interests in continuing to increase the police force. Like, what's that all about? I think in all of the research and all the citations, so much of it is going to like wealthy white property owners. They're a huge group that benefits from this carceral system. But on this spectrum here, we've got the power and influence bar. You can map out an agency, an elected official, someone in your community who you're trying to gauge what their power and influence is in changing these outcomes around carceral systems for youth, especially around public spaces and parks. So I mapped out on here a school district official. I put them here as potentially, kind of medium, high power, but also on the left side, if you see the y-axis, how aligned are they with decarceration? What is school punishment like? Like, do they have some really serious consequences for getting a book report, or for being late 10 times, or being loud and obnoxious and a teenager in class? What are those consequences like in the school system? So could we start with school district officials? Like, the things that they implement in schools and classrooms can make sure that, that those don't continue to lead to kids going from school to jail, school to prison. So that's the power map format here. And if anybody has like an idea you want other people to take away from this discussion, a stakeholder who you might have worked with who can help move the outcomes, feel free to put that sticky note down and map that. This is really just to model one way to think about how do we move towards solutions. We got to think of the people impacted. We got to think about the people who have a lot of power over decisions, like who gets to vote at city council around homeless sweeps, who gets to vote on closing the basketball courts, who gets to decide what the curfew is. I think those are all the things we can see as potential changes, but who is at the center of making that change happen? Quick memo, the person vacuuming the hallway in my apartment building comes on Fridays, and my little Chihuahua pit bull does not like the vacuum sound. So if he goes off, my apologies. I've got the other slide here, another way to set up this Jamboard to think about solutions around policing, eliminating policing, and some solutions around safety. What would it take at the local level? If we're thinking just local, you can think federal or statewide, but in the city of Portland, there are movements to like fully restructure the emergency response. How do we get houseless people to receive help on issues that are non-emergency and don't involve police coming to the scene and creating more issues for them? So we're thinking about like social workers, community outreach folks, and making sure they're all compensated well to do this really important work. And I think for youth in public spaces, if youth experience harm or they experience the male gaze and some creep is following them around, they experience issues out there, who can they call for help? Which adults can they trust? Who are first responders to young people? And who are we teaching them? Are the adults they can go to for help? So this is, one of those ways to think through safety beyond policing. And if anybody really has an idea they want to make sure other people take away from this session, feel free to just post it on there. I see folks typing in and just hovering. Thank you. All right, if folks have any questions for me or any other folks in the room who want to get into it, feel free. Thank you for the comments, Stuart. I appreciate it. Would I be able to go back to one of the earliest slides about police exposure? Of course. I've been reading so many journals around health, public health, and I was really glad to come across that one. I think many of us have been thinking about what reproductive justice is. And reproductive justice means like our babies can be born, our babies live, that they don't have a short life expectancy, and that we care about young people throughout all their stages of their life. I think I've got that. Here we go. This one was by Hardiman, and this is the exposure slide. So Stuart, thanks for the request. Oh, it's still showing the board. Thank you. I'll move over to the right spot. Thank you. I think there's so many research opportunities to think about these linkages, because I know even climate change and exposure to microfine particulates has an impact on maternal and child health. So I think those are always those links, like everything's impacting babies and children throughout their lifespan, even the parent who's carrying the fetus. But we're talking about police exposure to brake dust now, and exposure to all kinds of emissions. And it just feels like learning about all these things, like, is there a safe place for us to be? There are very limited places or choices that we have to live. If you want to check out too the political determinants of health, have a great video about Jessica's story. If you just look that up on YouTube too, or if I could get that up here. I might show that while you all hang out. Okay, Wi-Fi don't let me down. Okay, while I'm getting that up, I think it's always good to give Thrivens a shout out. Might as well do that. Wish I could bring out my record player for you all. Do a live stream, do a little DJ set. But I'm trying to get this video up. I'll put it in the chat just in case. So we weren't able to get a breakout session talking about immigration, but I think there's a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities with some of the things we talked about here about whose parks. But I think regarding immigration, there's a lot more policy at the federal level, obviously, that will drive the outcomes. And I think one of the other suggestions I always recommend too, when it comes to trying to create safety and change these carceral systems, is we got to find a clear path to legalization for undocumented people. They shouldn't feel like they have to hide, or they shouldn't have to fear going to the emergency room or getting medical care because they don't have the paperwork, and that they fear getting exposed and deported. Okay. I'm going to go back. Looking through, I've got a lot of these. Just going to go back here and read back. Someone said it was hard to go to popular parks with friends because they were too far away. I think some people had to travel so much longer to get to a park. And when you're in rural areas too, maybe you might be closer to some other state parks if you have state parks in your area. But I know there's movements to create parks in urbanized areas and in our neighborhoods as much as possible. With the COVID pandemic, people have mixed feelings about this, but converting public streets into restaurant patios and parklets and parks, I think there's obviously, like, again, if the Public Works Department or the Department of Transportation has this appetite or this driver to create these like pop-up things or to create this kind of change, they can do it quickly, they can implement quickly. But there are a lot of changes that or improvements that communities of color have been asking for, like basic sanitation and other things that haven't been delivered. And here we are with the COVID pandemic, when a row of coffee shops and restaurants want more seating, they found a way to repurpose public space or to find ways to act. And I think that's something we're dealing with here with neighborhoods, like who gets the improvements, who gets them quicker. And I think the more improvements you might have in a space, you might have more police to go protect that property, where property is more important than people. Well, I think I'm gonna wrap up our session today, and I'm just gonna hang out here if anyone else has other comments or they need other links to resources. But I'm really grateful for you all to show up here, to show up for each other, to show up for Thrive-In's group and this wonderful network of urbanists. I want to give a shout out to the California Mobility Justice Advocates, everyone I've worked with in the People for Mobility Justice world. You all taught me a whole lot about rethinking enforcement in all of our work, and has so much patience to really inform community members on ways we could be better. I'm glad to continue that work in the spaces that I'm in as a grad student as well. So, I'll let you know how that goes. But for anyone who's studying in school right now, continue to find things that you really care about studying, find ways you can work on reparative policies. I know Dr. Thomas will continue telling me about that. And, maybe I'll come back again soon. But you can catch up with Safe Routes Partnership on Twitter at Safe Routes Now. You can check out our organization, saferoutespartnership.org. We're rolling out a lot of work right now on trying to unpack all the details of the bipartisan infrastructure law and what this means for like non-transportation wonky people, like for everyone who's involved in youth health or other community health. How can we make advocacy for the implementation easier and better? How do we create actionable steps to making sure money goes to communities that really need it? And that's what we're busy with right now. If you want to connect with Safe Routes Partnership, you want to talk about technical assistance for your community, if you happen to be a CDC grantee under a certain program, we can work something out. But please get a hold of us, and I can put my email in the chat. I don't think we have recording for this at all. I know Unurbanist is supposed to be one of those things like you had to be here and you all are part of this special group who showed up, and there's no way to repeat this. So I think this is like what makes this special. Oh, I got a little instant message here, a DM, to talk about some of the research that I've done or seen that addresses houseless folks living within public right-of-way and parks. Yeah, that's all just emerging right now. I think we're seeing a whole lot about some emerging solutions on addressing traffic safety issues of houseless folks getting hit and killed because their tents are on freeway shoulders, they're living underneath overpasses, underpasses. And I think right now, I haven't come across anything that was recently published, but I know there's so much work around there on making sure that we provide permanent housing now. If anything, like that's the best solution. How can we transform so many vacant units available in so many of our cities and get them to be reused and repurposed as permanent housing now for houseless people? I think there's, a lot of interim solutions there of, just tiny homes or just some temporary pop-up homes and shelters. But from what, we've read and heard from lots of research from even Portland State University has a huge research center on houselessness. You have to search Dr. Marisa Zapata at PSU, but a lot of the feedback from houseless people say, they need permanent safe housing now. They don't want housing with a massive code of conduct. They want to be themselves. They want to heal and socialize and be themselves. So I think that's something that we have to think about. Houselessness and our parks work always go hand in hand. I know those of us working on walking and biking issues as we're trying to build trail projects, there's a lot of pushback like, well, we shouldn't build those trails because it's just going to become a place that's going to accumulate lots of encampments and lots of chop shops for bikes and cars. But I don't think that's a reason we should stall any kinds of projects to make sure people can travel safely, because even people who live in those encampments on that kind of public right of way, like trails, they need to use trails as well. They need places to walk and bike safely. So we can't forget houseless folks as a big part of our audience and stakeholders. They've been treated as invisible in park spaces. And for those of you who work with houseless youth as well, they'll let you know that they need places to safely walk and bike and transit access as well to navigate services across the region, like places like Los Angeles, where you get your HIV meds in one place, you get your meals in one place, you're going to school somewhere else, and just traversing a city like that all in one day, all the time with very little resources is tough. So if we want to address camping in the public right of way, I think the easiest answer I could think of off the top of my head is permanent housing now. But thank you all. I'm glad to see people pop in and out, share some questions in the chat. But I think we'll find a way, because Brittany's awesome, our equity and comms person. I can create a copy of our presentation, or I'll blog out some of the takeaways from the slides and some of the citations you might be looking for, because I've got a stack of journals and books that I've been bookmarking just for this. So I'd love to share that reading list with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to end this room for the next session that will begin at 2:30 p.m. For decarcerating biking. You can enter that one by joining on our website at anurbanist.com. Thank you. And if you are free, you can join another breakout session. Thanks.